So Pollinate Impact is a member-led network of incubators and accelerators across the Global South. And what we've heard consistently is that access to funding and sustainability strategies are very often a big challenge for the incubators and the accelerators that we're working with and we're supporting. So as a network, we share we share access to information that our partners at Assist Asia help us with. So our members every week in their inbox get a list of opportunities that they can bid for. So we're really trying to approach this to reduce the information asymmetry on the opportunities that are out there to access funding. But we also recognize that that's not enough, because in addition to knowing what opportunities are out there, we know that there's a big also skills gap in terms of how we can actually bid and position our organizations to go after that work. So that's why we brought in Joshua Pineda from Assist Asia to help us understand how, what are some of the best approaches and tools and tricks of the trade for proposal writing and writing effective proposals. So we'll jump in. Every time we start a meeting with Pollinate Impact, we start with a few check-in questions. So I'll ask Tassin to pull up the Mentimeter. So thank you, Tassin. Just click on that link in the chat that will open the Mentimeter poll. And thanks, Tassin is sharing her screen. So our check-in question that we're going to start with is, we want to hear what's one emotion that describes how you feel when you approach proposal writing. It could be a word, it could be a phrase. Well, we want to know, what does it feel like? What is that one emotion or that one word that you would want to share when when you're starting to write a proposal or when you're going to bid for it. So feel free to just, again, click on the Mentimeter poll there in the chat. And you can just enter a word or a phrase. Okay, anxious. Yeah, it can be definitely anxiety inducing. Oh, optimism. I like that. We have some positivity in the room. Confusion. Okay. Great. So yeah, I mean, it can be very difficult to navigate the RFPs, to understand what they're looking for. Daunting, eager. Okay, great. So yeah, I think we have a balance of, we want to get the funding, we're excited to go for it, but we're a little bit concerned about how to approach it, what to say. Are we saying the right things? Are we saying the wrong things? Yeah, excitement. Awesome. Okay, great. So I love the optimism in the room. That's fantastic. Let us know where you're coming from. That's the next question. Our focus at Pollinate Impact is across the Global South. So we'd love to just know where what country you're coming from. You can just type it in there in the Mentimeter poll. Kenya, India. I know, Joshua, where you're joining us from the Philippines, is it? Or
yes,
okay.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, awesome. Oh, South Africa, nice. Okay, great. So we've got some good representation. All right, we can go on to the next question. Just let us know what best describes your organization. We're trying to figure out who's in the room. Are you an incubator? Are you a community space? An investor? Maybe an entrepreneur? Just let us know what type of organization you're coming from. A consultant? Great. Membership network organization. Other. Oh, let me know in the chat what other is, if you just want to put in the chat an incubator or accelerator. Okay, so great. So we've got a good spread of folks. And then the last question that we wanted to ask, and I think this will really help Joshua kind of tee us up for the next segment. What's the most daunting challenge when it comes to proposal writing? When you're approaching those proposal writing, what's the biggest challenge that you're experiencing? So it can be a phrase, it can be a few sentences. We'd love to just kind of hear from your side what some of those biggest challenges are, and we can give that. Maybe we can give that a minute, and Tassie, maybe we can leave this up while people sort of put their thoughts together, while I hand it over to Joshua to introduce and get us started. So Joshua, we'll kind of let folks populate, I think, this challenge as we go, but I'll hand it over to you to introduce yourself and get us started.
Okay, thank you, Ariel. So good day, everyone. So I don't know the exact time zones of everyone here, so I hope a good day is already an encompassing greeting. So I'm Joshua Pineda. I'm the research and acquisitions lead for Assist. Basically, I have been working with Assist in doing grant applications or funding opportunity applications since uh, the end of the pandemic, 2020, and it has been a lot of applications there, here and there, and you get used to the grant ecosystem as you go through, and it's something that an interesting thing is that we did a similar training before with Shami, if you know Shami, a year ago, as well as with a few other incubators as well in the group, on being more familiar with the grants ecosystem and being more giving them an introduction as well to proposal writing. So yeah, basically I lead a team of 6 to 7 writers who also apply for different grant opportunities. Michaela Imperial, who is with me here from Assist, can attest to that. She gets very stressed out with me following up with different types of funding opportunities that she's applying for. So yeah, basically that's the gist of my work and what we do in Assist. Basically, Assist is a development organization. We are founded in the Philippines and we also operate in South Asia and Southeast Asia through our different projects, development initiatives that is born out not only from um, our own means, but also through the partnerships that we have formed throughout these different countries. That is something that I'll also go through because uh, what we believe in is that there are no secrets in the development sector. We all want to achieve greater good for a lot of people. So we wanted to share this knowledge to you guys, and we hope that it would be helpful, particularly if you want to um, get acquainted more with the grants ecosystem. So I think I can we can start, I guess, right, Ariel?
Yep,
Okay,
yep,
so
go for it.
yeah, so Michaela, can you start the presentation? Okay, it's taking a bit of time. Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned, we are part of Assist, and we are part of a small unit of Assist called GrantNav. GrantNav is a small unit that provides different funding opportunity assistance to different non-profit organization, non-government organization, or even government organizations that are interested in getting into the grants ecosystem, as we call it. So for this session, we are tasked with looking into how do we apply for the grant applications or the funding opportunities that we find on a daily basis. Because I know some of you have already tried their hand into researching different funding opportunities. Maybe you saw it online, you saw it in different development sector groups, in LinkedIn, or even in other external websites like Funds for NGOs, grants.gov, etc. There are a lot of funding opportunities that we can try to look at and take advantage of. But it is pretty daunting, as mentioned by many of you earlier. So, Michaela, next slide, please. So for the purpose of this presentation, I wanted to focus our attention more closely into the proposal writing part. So what does it mean to actually write proposals? Because that is something that we always hear when we want to, apply for a different funding opportunities. Um, Next, we want to know what are the preparatory activities we need to do for proposal preparation, because it's not just basically when you create a proposal, you are creating a whole package. It's not just a simple means of like creating a whole 20-pager document. Third is how do we ideate or create a very strong concept for our proposal. So that's a good place to start in terms of like proposal writing, proposal ideation. Next would be the proposal writing itself. So we have outlined different types of techniques, models, or scenarios that you can also emulate. You can also use for your own benefit, for your own organization's benefit. Lastly, proposal review and submission. So, um, particularly for grants, because grants are highly competitive. So sometimes you just missed one mark and they just reject the actual proposal itself. So we need to be very we need to scrutinize every process of it. Hence we have a proposal review and submission section for it. So this is the basics of the presentation that we want to go through for tonight. So next slide, please. Yeah, so introduction to proposal writing. So next slide, yeah. So before we start, we wanted to have like a crash course to introduce you to the different funding opportunities that you will find in the internet, basically, because that's where we get our sources right now. So most of you guys would be familiar with the grants. These are funding opportunities that primarily benefit the grantees for benefiting their own purposes or programs. Excuse me. So a grantor's involvement with the grant is limited to grant administration and monitoring. But sometimes they also manage, how the grant or the project is being implemented on ground. And there are different types of funding or grant funding opportunities, more focused on research, or maybe if the grant is looking at supporting programs or public and private foundation grants that you will also encounter. Another type of funding opportunity that you might find is what we call contracts of service, or internally in Assist we call them as TORs, or terms of reference for the organization. These are funding opportunities that directly benefits the payer's own program. Although the recipient of the contract payments may receive incidental benefits in addition to compensation for service. So basically, they are paying the organization to do a specific job for them. The payer maintains some significant direct involvement in the activities funded by a contract for service. For example of these are hiring consultants for creating specific knowledge tools or management tools, or managing events. Like, for example, if I remember correctly, a few years ago, Wise Healy was looking for a specific organization to implement a leadership program in Asia. So, something like that, like um, implementing a week-long leadership incursion for the youth. So that's part of what we call a contract of service. So these knowing what type of funding opportunity you're applying for is important, because sometimes there would be different types of requirements that goes with it, and how you would form or write your proposal itself. For grants, it's much more um, the writing is much more heavier compared to the contracts of service, because contracts of service, they already have the specific things lined up. They want to see the specific deliverables delivered by the specific organization. Unlike in grants, they want to get to know how you would come up with a solution that is innovative enough for their program, and how it would translate into action. So that's basically a much more difficult thing in terms of funding opportunity application. Next slide, please. Okay. So then this is what we propose that you guys do. Of course, it can be modified based on your organization's needs. So we have a four-phase um, proposal writing timeline that we implement within our organization. So we have the phase one, the preparation phase, which includes not only the preparation of the documents, but also the researchers needed for the proposal writing itself. Phase two is proposal ideation, basically putting together the strong concept that you want to apply for. We want to use as an application for the program itself. Phase three is proposal writing. So this is the writing proper, how you would start to package a proposal from your introduction to the objectives and to the implementation strategies that you will also be writing. Lastly is proposal review and submission. So um, we want you to incorporate always to have like internal checks within your team and also external checks if you are working with a consortia as well as to to get to know more of the submissions themselves. Next slide, please. Next slide, Miguela. Okay, so now we are getting to um, the meat of the discussion itself. So we have identified three types of proposal structures and styles throughout our multitudes of applications since 2020. So the first type is what we call the expression of interest, or sometimes it's called the letter of interest or inquiry. It's usually just a short document. Applicants' details includes like the interest in the funding, like how you would express your interest for the funding opportunity itself, as well as to leverage your own capacities and experiences on organization. As I mentioned, this type of proposal structure and style is usually 1 to 2 pages in terms of its length. But as is true with the two other types as well, it really varies because um, programs and funding organizations would have their own styles, would have their own what they call them templates that you need to follow. So these are just indicative of what we have seen so far throughout the applications that we have done. Next type would be concept notes. So these are much more common, or I think some of you might have already created a concept note or two in applying for different funding opportunities. So some of the funding agencies that we have encountered call them preliminary proposals. These are project concepts that has the actual project details needed, like the concept itself, the implementation, who are the target beneficiaries, the impact that it wants to achieve, as well as the other relevant additional information requested by the donor. Lastly is the full proposal or full application. So this is either in the form of a full descriptive document or sometimes it's a full online form with a lot of sections. So it depends on the funding agency itself. But basically it looks very much into specific details of the implementation strategies, what are the expected outputs, outcomes and impacts, and how you would come to arrive to that impact, creating the activities themselves, but how it connects from the concept to the actual impact. Then lastly, a lot of additional requirements. So be prepared to also always prepare specific requirements from particularly that are already within your organization, like applicant documents information, registration forms, that legal registrations forms that you have, um, expert CVs if you need to like attach a CV, particularly for the proposal itself, and other relevant plans because there will be some attachments there like gender plan, risk and mitigation plan, or monitoring and evaluation plan. Usual length that we've experienced is 13 plus pages, even more sometimes. Sometimes we encounter like 25 pages or more, depending on the need or depending on the request by the donor themselves. So these are the usual three suspects in terms of proposal structures and styles that we encounter in any of the grant applications that we have had. Of course, as I mentioned, there will always be variations to this, and sometimes some funding agencies would use terms like concept notes and full proposal interchangeably, but that is something that you need to always review, particularly through the program document that they will be releasing. So next slide, please. Now, so this part is that since we already understood that there are a lot of like different types of proposal structures, and there are also different types of funding opportunities that we will encounter within the realm of the internet itself. Before we move on, I want you to maybe we can have a brief interactive session here, and not really interactive, but I'm quite interested in knowing what specific thematic area are you guys working in? Maybe you could mention it in the chat. Are your organizations working for the environment, for food security and agriculture, digital skills and literacy, etc. So we want it is very important that prior to any application is that you know what your organization stands for and you know what your concept is standing for, because it would be easier for you to apply or to create a stronger proposal when you are working in an industry that you are quite familiar with. So someone said sustainable industry and economy, youth and women environment. That's great. So that we also work with women and empowerment actually. Um, how about the others? So it would be nice if you could also join in. So, but in any case, um, this is part of knowing what your niche is as part of at least being able to pinpoint how you would frame your proposal itself. So basically, a proposal is not just um, it's also a means for you to show your brand as an organization, particularly to different donors and different funding agencies that would be interested to not only fund your immediate proposals but also your future proposals as well. So I encourage you and your organizations to look into really pinpointing what are the thematic areas that you work on. Or maybe you could use the sustainable development goals as um, a structure of just categorizing where you work in and where your organization lies. So yeah, someone else also said climate change adaptation, education skills development, innovation, and social inclusive business. That's great. That's great. Thank you for those who answered. So the next slide, I think, it'd be part of the second: health and nutrition, education, and innovation. Thank you. So I think the next slide would be an introduction to the next section, if I'm correct. Yes. So thank you for those who answered. It would be very great if we could have another conversation beyond this training, of course. But since we have limited time, I need to move to the next section. So proposal preparation. So what are the things that we need to be cognizant about in preparing our proposal? So next slide. So we have outlined three items: researching, benchmarking, and preparing. So these three are not necessarily successive in nature. You can actually do them in parallel. But these are the preparatory activities that we usually have for any type of proposal writing. So let's start with researching first. So before you start any attempt at writing the proposal, you need to be more familiar with the program background and history. For example, there are a lot of grants there that really dishes out a lot of programs for, let's say, if it's in health and it's at the top of my head, you would know like the USAID always has this program called TB Local Organization Network. So they want to look at how different organizations can create a local network in TB hotspots in the global south in particular. So knowing the program and background and history as well as the thematic area, it would lead us to better means of navigating how we could write the proposal itself. Of course, it comes with it that we know the potential partnerships that we have. As I mentioned, Assist was built not only through the innovative ideas that we have, but also through the partnerships that we have forged throughout the 20 years of our existence. So, if you would notice, most, if not all, of our projects is born out of the partnerships and collaborations with different multi-sectoral stakeholders. Uh, so yeah, it will be important for you to know once you have identified the program background history and identified the thematic area you want to work on, who are the potential partnerships that we can have for in order to make the proposal much more stronger. For example, maybe in certain programs you would see that okay, we can take up the training components for this project, but maybe there are some components such as the provision of specific equipment that we can't take up. Maybe a partner in that regard or that excels in that area would be better fit with the project itself. So forging those partnerships. Next would be location and local history. So it is important, of course, that whilst most of the um, funding opportunities, grant opportunities have what we call they are called global opportunities, meaning we can apply for them even from different countries as long as it's not blacklisted from their from their list. um, but we need to know in terms of the thematic area focus and in terms of the program history and background of the grant itself, how is our location faring? Is let's say, as I mentioned earlier, tuberculosis. So is tuberculosis a big thing in the country that you want the project to be implemented in? Is it something that you think would be worthwhile for the funding agency to fund? Um, then lastly is conduct just not really a full blown analysis. I'm not going to ask you to create a 20 pager as a precursor for your 20-page or 5-page proposal, but at least create a landscape analysis that you would understand what are the key current status quo in terms of like the thematic areas that you are working on, and what are the key opportunities that you can take advantage of. Sometimes it would already lead you to the solution or how you would leverage your proposals or concepts in the proposal itself. Next would be benchmarking. Basically, benchmarking is knowing what the program previously funded and what are the previously funded organizations and activities that they have done in the past. So it's important for you to know that because it would also give you a glimpse on how they evaluate each of the proposals that you submit. It's difficult because in grants, it's not as if we have the agency to just come to the evaluators or to the lead of the grants program itself themselves, and we could always talk to them. Most of the time there are restrictions that needs to be followed, since they need to have fairness in terms of like choosing the winner for the grants. So we need to be strategic in looking at what are the previous projects funded, but are also maybe there are solutions that already exist to address the problem stated in the program in the actual program itself. It would be interesting to benchmark these solutions as well, and also to understand how your innovation or your organization can come into these solutions. So in Assist, we have what we call a process we call as adopt and adapt. So we believe that most of the innovations that we already have are things that are already done, that were already done by different organizations in different areas and in different contexts. We just need to adapt them to the current situation and to make it more strategic and innovative. And lastly, innovation is relevant to the grant focus. So maybe it would be great as well to create a benchmark of like all the innovations that you could also add, or the value adding that you could add to the proposal. For example, maybe in the health space, it would be good to have digital solutions or digital what you call them, digital platforms that would allow you to monitor um patients, the care of patients, let's say the mental health of the patient, to give them a platform for getting easier mental health services. So that's an example of an innovation that you can also explore or adapt for your proposal as well. So researching and benchmarking, they are closely related. Researching focuses on the actual program itself, while benchmarking focuses on existing solutions that are beyond the program that you are applying for. Maybe they are already implemented by some other organization under a different grant. For example, EU Commission, maybe they funded a specific opportunity or innovation that might be of interest to the USAID application that you are doing right now. So that's the thing with the different benchmarking that you can do. Um, and of course, in parallel, you can do these logistical administrative things such as preparing or creating a checklist of all grant requirements. So we are already on the third one on the right. So create a checklist of all grant requirements. So it would be helpful, as I mentioned, and even more strategic in proposal writing if you are much more organized in how you would um, uh, organize the way that you write the proposal itself, and to make sure that everything is accounted for. So you need to get into the nitty gritty details of the program itself, because sometimes when you read through the grant document, there are certain nuances and there are certain small statements that could be the deal breaker for your application. For example, if you did not attach a specific document, it will be void, or they won't be able to completely accept your application. So they are very much strict when it comes to that. So next would be create a work breakdown structure or timeline, something that I'll show an example of. But basically, it's creating a very detailed to-do list so that you would know who what is the timeline for each of the activities you will be doing for proposal writing, who will be doing it, and as well as what are the other things that you need to account for in terms of those activities. Particularly if you see a specific problem, you would be able to see them as you go through the work breakdown structure or the timeline that you have. Lastly, collate all templates for the proposal and the budget. So basically, proposal packaging itself is, um, I'll say, most of the time in my experience, it's just 50% writing, 50% using of templates. Because templates from different funding agencies would help you know, understand how to write or how to create the actual proposal package itself. So you need to be familiar with all the templates. You need to be familiar with all the necessary sections that the proposal will be asking for as a preparation for the proposal writing itself. So yeah, I think that's basically the preparation phase. Next slide, I think would be just some samples. Yeah, yeah. So this is a sample for the supporting document checklist. This is actually an application did a year ago for this is an application for a specific grant. Particularly, we are submitting um, uh, an application so that these um, one of our projects would get scaled up basically. So the as you may see, there are a lot of different letters of recommendation, letters of support, reports that they want to see. Um, if your agency would have, if your organization would have annual reports or financial reports, it would be it needs to be reflected here as well, etc. So this is a sample of what we did before. Next slide. This is what a sample of the work breakdown structure that we did before. Of course, as I mentioned, you can contextualize it. You can create your own as long as you are able to fully manage the actual action steps that you need to do for the proposal itself. So you would see how we organize each of the proposal components at the top and what are the needed actions we need to do in order to actually get them done. So, not seen here, or at least we made it blank, are the names of the people that are assigned for each action because, as I mentioned, I don't believe that that proposal writing and preparation is a one-man job. It's a very team a very a good effort for the team to do it. However, of course, it would be good if there is only one lead writer and the others are supports. So this list, work breakdown structure, provides that organization or at least that the roles and responsibilities on who will take accountability for what, and it gives you governance. Was it done in the internal deadline, etc. So yeah, next slide. Proposal ideation. So I hope you guys are able to keep up because I think one of the downfalls of doing online things is not being able to see some of you guys and your reactions. So I hope you guys are learning a lot from the session so far. So this is actually coming up with the full core um, of the proposal itself. Like, what is the main thing that you want to address? So next slide, please. before we start, what we usually do in order um to create the concept or what we call a concept framework in Assist, internally we have what we call a concept framework, is that we identify what is the main problem and what is the proposed solution to that problem. So we have an example here, but it would be interesting, of course, if you guys could also, after this call or after this presentation, maybe you could also try your hand at identifying what are the main problems that you want to address through your own innovations. So the sample here is, despite the rich biodiversity in the East Coast, it is threatened by plastic pollution from local populations along waterways and tributaries. So there is an imminent threat of plastic pollutions in the local waterways and tributaries. And the proposed solution to that problem is, through local youth education and action, we can address rampant ocean pollution and inspire youth-led local ocean initiatives in the coastal cities of the East Coast. So this is a very simple way of outlining what is the main problem and what is the proposed solution. Um, and it starts with that, because we can't always start with the very complex things when it comes to making a proposal. It usually starts with knowing what is the core of your proposal, and then we expound that core bit by bit. So this is our recommendation to you. When you're writing your proposal, always start with creating a problem statement and a solution statement. How in the context of the program that you are applying for example, if it's a USAID or EU project that focuses on peace building, what is the main problem in your local area that you see uh, coincides with the goal of the program? Next is, in terms of that, in the context of that problem, what is your proposed solution? So what is your organization, company, or even your consortia proposing to do to address that main problem? So yeah, basically that's how we would kickstart the writing process itself. Next slide. Then, um, I think I already mentioned this a lot earlier. Um, we need to identify, of course, who are the target beneficiaries and the stakeholders, key stakeholders for the project. This would not only give you the ability to understand who um, can be a potential part of your consortia, but also so that you would have a more focused approach in implementing your solution. So, having said that this is the problem and this is the solution, who are the target beneficiaries? If you're going back to the previous slide, you would the example there mentioned that the youth is a huge part of um, creating a better means for solid waste management to address plastic pollution in the tributaries and local waterways. Having said that, so they will be the main focus or the key beneficiaries for the project that we want. Next would be looking at who are the stakeholders that are affecting, the specific key beneficiaries for the project. For example, looking at aside from the youth themselves, who are the what do you call this, the partners or the groups that provide most influence to these groups. So maybe you could look at the schools themselves, like are the curriculum or the school curriculum enough in terms of uh, creating more awareness and education regarding solid waste management? Are the local governments also producing um, materials that would provide that education? Um, and maybe some other stakeholders like companies, like specific establishments like malls? Are they promoting that type of education that you're seeking for to also inculcate them in the youth? So that's something that you can take a look at. So as I mentioned, um, it goes part that you review the grant program focus, research extensively on the proposed project locality, as well as to um, s- create a simple stakeholder mapping and analysis for your proposed solution. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I guess we are already a bit 70% uh within the presentations themselves. I hope I'm not boring you guys at all with my talk. Um, so we are now entering into the proposal writing part of the actual thing. And you would know that there are a lot of steps and there are a lot of models that I will be showing. Um, as I mentioned, even after this talk, I think Ariel and the team would also be sharing with you the presentation that I'm presenting. So it would be helpful to you when you are writing your own proposals themselves. So next slide, please. So how to write your background. So we're looking at it sequentially from this point on, like how in terms of like the usual proposals, we always have a background, methodology, and maybe methodology or implementation strategy, um, impact, and sustainability. Usually, that's how a short proposal would go. But in terms of background, how do we write it? How do we start it? Oftentimes, it's the hardest thing to start when you're writing anything at all. So we have three scenarios that we wanted to share. Of course, they can be called differently by other people, but this is what we call them. We call the boom bust scenarios. So the first is the boom bust, second is the bust boom, and the third is the boom bust, if I'm correct. So the first is the boom bust. The boom is in this case refers to the negative scenario issue that necessitates a solution, meaning there is already a problem that you have identified through the problem statement or maybe through your extensive research. The bust is a demand for positive and effective solution. So when you're making a background, a strong background usually necessitates um, a very good narrative flow in terms of how you would link not only the objectives of the program, the objectives of your own the problems and the challenges that you identified, but also what is the solution or the overall solution that you would want to do in order to address that problem. So first is in the case of in the case here, the increase in unemployment rates in India during the pandemic exacerbated the difficulties faced by women in middle and lower income homes, left unemployed and economically dependent on their partners, and whose domestic care work was cemented by the lockdowns, one quarantine pass per household policy. So this is the boom scenario. So this is the scenario wherein there is a negative scenario, unemployment rates increase due to exacerbated by the pandemic itself, and difficulties faced by women. There is the next part would be the bust, which is there is an urgent need for women to have access to and capacity to participate in paid workforce through job opportunities or independent work opportunities. So what we're doing here, since this is just a background, is not to state the whole solution because that is a job for the other sections of the proposal itself, but to create um, a small preview of how your solution should be addressed, or at least create a preview on what type of excuse me, what type of mindset you're writing your solution, your actual solutions for. So that is usually the goal of writing a background, a strong background, so that there will be a good narrative flow from the problem up to the impact that you want um, to have for the project. So next slide, please. Bust boom, in this case, there is already an existing solution, but not all solutions would be all encompassing. So you would know that there are times like, for example, in different countries, we already have policies regarding discrimination in the workplace, etc. However, there are some holes that the policies lack. So um, an example stated here is with the existing law mandated strategies for peace and security, actions to preserve and protect human rights in India have the fundamental power to maintain and strive for lasting peace. So there are already existing law mandated strategies for peace and security in India. However, these approaches can only be fully realized when the youth are capacitated and enabled with knowledge and understanding of peace in Indian context with a strong background of peace education. So there is still a glaring need so that we could take advantage of the existing bust scenario, if you will. So in this way, we are looking at an existing solution and looking at the specific gap and looking at for an opportunity basically that we can implement a better not only a better way but enhancing the existing solution itself through our innovations and interventions. Next slide. Last is the bus case, wherein the solution has been proven effective, but there are present opportunities to increase good results. Excuse me. So for example, let's say in Asia, as mentioned here, over the past 2 decades, natural disasters have been increasing in both severity and frequency across the globe, particularly in Asia. Though there has been a rise of access to information from a wide array of online sources, allowing a whole generation of young people growing up to reading, seeing, and experiencing the wrath of calamities, they have been doing so as much more than just bystanders. This is a ripe opportunity to engage the youth at an early age and develop them as proactive citizens in the face of natural disasters. So you can see here that through the better access for information, innovation, and technology, not only in the disaster risk reduction space, but also in general, it is a ripe opportunity to further engage the youth to make them more proactive citizens for natural disasters. So this is a bus case na in terms of how you would frame your background. So yeah, these are writing models that we are suggesting that you can do in order to start up, the writing process itself, because we know it's hard to start writing anything at all, even if you have a very strong concept. Next slide. Okay, so next would be how to write effective project objectives. So project objectives, uh, most of the time, it's one of the core things that the funding agencies are looking for, because objectives very, very much outlines your own implementation strategies, how it how your activities would relate through how your activities would relate to the different types of like um to the different um types of objectives, main objectives that you have, and of course the overall program objective itself. So one of the things that we suggest is that You can use different words as mentioned in the Bloom's taxonomy. I wasn't able to include it here, but it depends on the objectives that you create itself, or you write up itself. You can use the different verbs indicated in the Bloom's taxonomy. Next slide is you could also, next slide, use the very much popular SMART in terms of drafting your objectives. Making sure that the objective is specific, making sure that it is measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely or time bound. So making sure that all these fives are within the objectives that you write. Of course, we created examples there, but you can view that in your own time. And you could also, try to gauge if it's smart or it's not smart in your own time. Next slide. Now, in creating your own objective, it's important that you also be cognizant of what we call a theory of change. Basically, a theory of change is how you would outline your own innovation or your own intervention into achieving, how you would outline every activity, every output, every outcome into achieving the lasting impact, the long-term impact that you want for your projects or for your programs. So it's much more than that, of course, but usually any objective that you write would have accompanying activities, accompanying outputs and deliverables and short-term outcomes. So it would be helpful that when you're creating your objectives, these are already in your mind, particularly in how you would be writing them, because you need to have an objectives that's just not lip service, so to speak. No, that's just the or too general, but it needs to have achievability or what specific outcomes you expect you would see after the project itself. Next slide. So, having said that, making your project objectives and making your strategies and activities comes hand in hand. Uh it's not only a successive activities. It can be, but it would also help you to actually navigate or create an effective strategy if when you're creating or finalizing your objectives, you're also starting with creating what specific activities that you have. So, in Assist, we implement what we call the 5D approach in all our projects, um, and also in all our proposals as well. So, the 5D stands for discover, design, develop, deliver, and determine. So basically, discover is looking at what are the project preparatory activities that will you be implementing. So these are not to be confused with the proposal preparatory activities. Rather, it is the project preparatory activities. Would you be meeting with key stakeholders? Would you be acquiring different certifications first? Um, is there any sort of like pre-project data gathering analysis that you need? What specific partnerships you would need to leverage? Next would be design. Um, are there trainings, products, or services that will be designed specifically for the project? Um, so that is something that you also need to see. Maybe you would need to meet with different stakeholders who can design specific products for you, or hire different consultants to design trainings, etc. Develop, looking at the design and develop is actually quite hand in hand. Sometimes you can separate them, sometimes you can. But develop is what are the logistic and administrative preparation that are implemented for training rollout? Are there assets that you need to pre-test, finalize, and produce? Then, of course, deliver is the project delivery part. Like if you are going to implement the training, if you're going to handing over a specific product, or if you're going to establish a specific framework or an implementation strategy or policy itself. Lastly is determine. So what are the feedback of the beneficiaries initially, of course, to the project services and products, and what immediate impact is apparent after the project delivery. You need to outline them so that by the end of the project you have full documentation if it's actually outlined or if it's actually working, the project's working. So basically we outline each of the activities and and the project implementation strategies based on the 5D approach. You can use them as phases. Phase one, 1.1, these are the activities. 1.2, a specific activity on data gathering, etc., etc. So you can tailor fit them as you see fit. Next slide. Yeah, so these are just tips on creating timeline and budget. Budget is timeline. Activities and budget are goes hand in hand as well, because you could already gauge how much resources you need for specific activities once you identify them. So the first step is identify the key actions to be done for the project, as mentioned in the previous slides. Determine the resource availability and project dependencies. So you would need to determine maybe there is partner that you need for technical purposes that you need to pay for specific services. Maybe there are already some dependencies in terms of policies or in terms of existing resources by your consortium members as well. Group them according to the phases of the implementation strategy. So you can use the 5D, specify the timeline for the action. So it can be done in weeks, months, quarters, years, depending on the project duration, and determine the specific cost items and projected expenses for each action. So next slide. So these are just samples. So this one is done in months, and we have outlined like each of the specific action item under the 5D scheme. So discover, these are the activities that we will do, and the duration is 2 months for the first activity, and so on and so forth. So as I mentioned, I think Ariel and the others will be sending this to you so you can check it in your own time. Next slide. Yeah, so this is a sample of a high-level budget. This was done for a small project that we did with the German embassy. Like we highlighted each of them based on the components. You can do it differently. For example, it's not a specific activity-based budget, but more on HR costs, travels, and equipment costs, etc. So you can do it like that, depending on the need of the concept itself. But we also have another um, example here. Next slide, which is a much more detailed look into a type of proposal budget, particularly if it's a full proposal. So this is something that we submitted to the EU Commission. They are um, very detailed in terms of like what are the specific actions, what are the value. Of course, you need to follow the value indicated by the funding agency. If they are from the US, it's US. If they are from the EU, it's often EU unless specified otherwise. For example, maybe they are specified in Danish kronos, etc. So you need to be very careful in drafting your budget. But basically, that's it. I think budget discussions itself is a separate topic that's actually quite extensive as well. So yeah, anyway, next slide. Yeah, okay. So after being able to create the main meat of your proposal itself, namely the excuse excuse me, So mainly the implementation strategies and activities, etc., as well as you already have the objectives and all the very main concepts of the proposal. There are some areas that funding agencies often look for. Particularly, they're looking for sustainability and if it's replicable or scale, it can be scaled up, particularly for proposal, because that's something that we can't implement projects that are just one-off. You know, we want if we want to create lasting change, there has to be a sense of or an element of sustainability with them. So our tips is that in your proposal or concept, you need to provide a mechanism for the project to sustain its benefits after the completion. So maybe it would need to have a specific revenue generation stream because oftentimes when the funding dries out, it needs to have its own funding stream so that it would continue. Or maybe it's local mainstreaming, training of specific local government units so that they could implement it at a lower cost or integrate it within their local budgets, or maybe continuous skills building for the sustainability part. Lastly, is you need to express intent for continuous exploration of funding opportunities to ensure financial viability. Always be open with any any exploration of funding opportunities so that you could expand or create a more lasting impact for the project. Um, yeah, that's our tip. Then next would be replication and scaling up. Identify other locations or countries for future implementation. Particularly if you already have a few pilots implemented up in your country, maybe you could explore another in another region that you think is good. Then increase the or maybe you could explore increasing the number of target beneficiaries or identify new target sectors. Lastly, is consult beneficiaries on their other needs to serve as reference for scaling up the project in the future. So that's something that we usually do in assist. We all and in the at the terminal end of our projects, we always have a multi stakeholder forum or consultation to understand what needs to be done in the future, what and how we can further improve our projects themselves. Next slide, please. These are other proposal considerations. I think I mentioned them a few slides back that sometimes funding agencies they look specifically for attachments like this. So a gender action plan, they look for detailed plan how you will ensure gender inclusivity within the project design. This can come from the form list of actions, inclusions, implementation models, and etc. They usually have their own templates, but maybe it would necessitate specific research on your end if you want to make it a strong gender action plan, particularly if the funding agency is very meticulous in it. Risk and mitigation, the detailed plan that enumerates all risk and mitigation strategies the proposed project will include. So it's usually something that you also outline within the proposal itself anyway. So try to look for good templates that sometimes USAID, ADB would have their own templates. So please do check. Lastly is M&E strategy. So for example, in USAID, they call this MEL, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So it really depends on how this is specific agency is excuse me, looking at this specific document itself. So it's basically a document of describing the monitoring and evaluation strategies of the project. This would include all documents and activities related to M&E and their specific timeline, frequency, and all measures for project alignment. This is to ensure that the project will be monitored closely to achieve its goals. So next slide. Okay. I guess we are, I think, less than 5 minutes left, but this is the last part of the last but not the least, because this is quite important as well. So proposal review and submission. Next slide. So what we do in Assist, particularly for our own proposals, is that we ensure that we have two levels of review before we submit them. First is that our writing team would have internal reviews. And we also have like key, um, what you call them, key experts internally who could review the proposals themselves. Afterwards, then we could also have the proposals be reviewed by our consortia partners, key stakeholders, or key partners that maybe that may or may not have stakes with the project or the proposed project, but it would be better if they do. Than local government units, because they would have some insights that we internally do not have, and it would be beneficial for the project itself, for the proposal itself. So next slide. Yes, I think this is the last slide. I hope so. We want you to also be cognizant on the type of proposal submissions that you would have, because there are some nuances in terms of proposal submission. Like you need to ensure that you're following a specific structure in terms of emailing it. Like the subject should say this, the subject will say that, and email submissions through online is usually something that is the norm in terms of submissions, particularly at the concept note stage. But oftentimes they would switch to online portals if it's the full application itself. So in terms of online application, always try to look at the guidelines that they provide in the program document. Lastly, is there are some offline application processes as well. Some of them would require post office submissions or direct submissions or presentation, particularly if they are interested in the pitches that you will be doing for the project itself. So be prepared to create a presentation if necessary, particularly for the proposal that you have. So, as I mentioned, you need to keep this in your mind, particularly before you submit anything, so that you can ensure that there is no deal breaker for your proposed project. Next slide. Okay, so thank you for your time. I think my voice is almost breaking, and I hope that you were able to learn a lot from this session. Of course, I will also be taking up some questions, so feel free to ask any question. Thank you. I'll
Yeah,
hand it over
thank
to
you so much,
Ariel.
Joshua. No, thank you so much. I think we definitely will open the floor for Q&A. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat here, or you can just unmute and ask it. I think one question that came to my mind, Joshua, as you're going through, is the time frame that you're spending on these proposals. I know sometimes we hear about the proposal, and then the deadline is not far thereafter. I mean, what's your recommendation in terms of how much time is the best sort of case to prepare, and then to kind of complete this? Because we know we have a lot of small teams that are resource constrained, so
Mm.
I think that would be helpful to understand.
Yeah, so it would really depend on the type of proposal that you're submitting. As I mentioned, we also categorize it based on the length, excuse me, and the requirements. So usually, and Michaela can attest to it, whenever a proposal is a full proposal for assist, um, we make sure that it's at least 1 month apart from the deadline, actual deadline, because a stronger proposal with more preparation would be would have higher chances of winning. rather than, something haphazard that we would do in a short amount of time. But there are moments sometimes because we can control, sometimes opportunities pop up that when we least expect it, and we only have 2 weeks to prepare. So sometimes we try to do what we can during those times, and oftentimes if the time is a limited factor, what I suggest you can do so that the organizations can start at least is to templatize. In certain proposals, you can already see that, oh, they would be looking for an organization profile. They would be looking for references for previous projects. So if you can create templates for your organization so that you can just cut and paste and maybe contextualize, or check for errors from time to time, it would really cut the time for any proposal preparation.
Okay, great. And I see there's a question from Tejas who's asking what AI-based tools or approaches could be leveraged to make writing proposals efficient. So, should we use ChatGPT to run through our proposals, or how can we sort of leverage technology to also help that make that more efficient?
Yeah, actually, no, what particularly for us, since we use Chat GPT um at the research stage, particularly in benchmarking stage, because it really provides um a great an easier way of searching references, particularly for the proposal. So that's one thing that you can leverage for. You could also because I'm not really discrediting Chat GPT itself, because I think it's a very wonderful tool once you really get to use it. Um, so you could also try to make certain sections of your proposals. As I mentioned, if you want to templatize, ChatGPT would be a good means of doing that, particularly for what we call uh, um, templatized sections such as, organization profile, or maybe a simple narrative on your monitoring and evaluation strategy, etc. But as I mentioned, since an AI-based tool can only do so much for now, we need to also be careful in finalizing the document itself. You need to double your efforts in reviewing, double your efforts in the levels of review that you need to do.
Great. And we have another question here from Zarawu, who's asking, what are some of the effective sites to search for grants? So Zarawu, I'll give a shameless plug here for Pollinate Impact, that we are actually sharing lists of opportunities with our members every week in their inbox that Assist Asia actually helps us put together. But Joshua, I think that'll be helpful to understand, where are some of the good places to be looking for some of these opportunities?
Okay, so one of the places that we're looking at is, if you would know, Funds for NGO. So that's a very free platform that you can take a look at. Of course, not everything is in there. You could also take a look at specific sites. For example, grants.gov would have US-based opportunities, particularly if you want opportunities by the US Washington Department of State or USAID themselves on local missions. So it's a good site to look at. Um, yeah, at the top of my head, those are the sites that I'm seeing. As I mentioned, and of course, I don't want to spill all the trades or secrets as well, since we're also like giving Pollinate Impact some of the listed curated grants that we have.
Great. And Zaraw, I'm not sure that I'm getting the second half of your question. So if you want to just unmute, does your project field require the type of background writing to use? Yeah, Zaraw, if you just want to unmute and ask the question, I think that might help? Because I'm not sure that I'm understanding the
Okay, hello, please can you hear me?
yes, please
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay, I'm asking regarding the background writing models. Does the type of project you're working on determine the type of background writing you should be using?
Hmm. So you're asking if the type of project field,
Yes, please.
uh, mhm. Well, I hope I can answer it effectively. Yes, because um it would the actual context of the problem or the actual thematic area that you will be working on would greatly affect what type of background that you will be writing. So, for example, as I mentioned, if it's an environmental focused grant and the challenges that you identified already focuses on the youth or on the lack of the support from the youth themselves, it would affect what type of background writing we would be needing or using as well. So it would really, that's why we created different scenarios so that when you are writing your background, it would be easier for you to identify, okay, so the problems we identified is not exactly a bust or a boom scenario, it's more of a bust. Maybe we're looking at this type of writing, scenario writing. So yeah, I hope I was able to answer your question.
Yes, please.
Great. Thanks, Joshua. I'll ask another question that I have while maybe some more come in through the chat. One of the things that we've heard a lot, Joshua, in a lot of our other conversations with Pollinate Impact around funding and sustainability approaches is the need to identify, those partners correctly, and then the willingness to sort of be able to say no, or to, recognize that maybe it's not the best fit to be going for a certain organization or to be going for a certain grant. So is there any advice that you could give these, the folks on this call? What are you looking for when you're looking at these opportunities and proposals, and how do you decide, which ones are worth the time to invest when we know you're saying it's gonna, you want a month to prepare, we have limited time. What are some recommendations on how to make sure we're using that time effectively and going after the right opportunities?
Hmm. Okay, that's a good question. Actually, because it's also something that we are also trying to work on, particularly with Assist, because it's not as if we're already an expert in creating partnerships. Um, in terms of partnerships, particularly for proposal development, we are looking at partners who would have the technical capacity or inclination for the thematic area or the program objectives themselves. Next is the country that they are affiliated to. For example, though it's not really stated outright in any grant application, or maybe there are some grant application that states this outright, but um, they would have more familiarity. For example, if a U.S. donor would have more familiarity with a U.S. Based partner compared to an EU based partner. So there are some nuances and politics that you need to be aware of as well. Um, of course, not too much, but just to be cognizant of any type of sensitivity in terms of funding, because basically funding, particularly if it's governed coming from the government, multilateral, bilateral, is quite a political type of uh, of funding themselves. Um, lastly is to get really to know your role and their role for the project, because sometimes and we have experienced this in some of our partnerships as well. There are intersecting roles that really eats the consortia alive if you're not really careful. So you need to know, okay, we will be focusing on training alone, while they will be focusing on doing specific knowledge management tools. So you need to be very specific in terms of what their role and responsibilities will be with your partnership and what your role and responsibilities will be. So yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that awareness is definitely key, and recognizing sort of your strengths and how it's aligning with the expectations of the funder. So Tejas has asked another question around storytelling, which I think this is a great question. You know, as how can we effectively transform some of these proposal components into effective and compelling stories, particularly the more technical pieces, you know, like theory of change, but I think more broadly, you know, how do we effectively tell those stories in these proposals to make them more compelling and more effective?
Well, to be honest, that's quite a difficult question because it's something that is usually the struggle of any writer of any proposal, is how to effectively make the proposal, because effectively a proposal is a narrative tool itself. It's not it's just a means of storytelling that this is a problem that persists in the world, this is a problem of the locality, and this is the solution that we have, and this is the limited scope that we have. So basically by way of being more familiar with the context that we work in, being well researched, and really being really good at curating which information you should include and which not should be included, is key to making it more compelling, because there is a balance you need to strike in terms to making it a technical paper, while also making the stories really stand out, because that is how usually some funding agencies would really look at proposals. Like, they would want to see lasting change, basically, although they want to see it in a methodological way uh done.
So there's some art to this science,
Yeah.
I guess, in articulating that. So we're coming right up on you know, on 90 minutes. So if you know, if anyone else has any more questions, you can put them in the chat, and maybe if Joshua has some time, you know, he can answer a few more. I know we've seen a few requests. We will share the slide deck. Joshua, you're okay with that, right?
Yeah.
We can share those. I think there's some really good resources in there for everyone to take back. So we'll definitely be sharing that. We'll also be sharing this recording in case you want to share it with any of your colleagues, but we'd really love to just appreciate everyone, you know, who's joined us today. We hope this was helpful. I know, Joshua, you mentioned that budgets may be a whole other topic. So maybe our next training with Joshua might be around budgeting. I know that came up as one of the challenges that came up in the Mentimeter poll is, you know, how do you develop that budget allocation? How do you deal with time when it comes to allocating that in the budget? So we'll be doing more of these sessions with Joshua and with Assist Asia. So